People who've had hard lives are actually more intelligent than most people who haven't. Not street smart, not tough. Genuinely, measurably, psychologically smarter in ways that actually matter. And I don't mean that as a motivational poster thing. I mean, science has looked at this, and the findings are kind of wild. Think about it for a second. When life forces you to figure things out, when there's no safety net, no backup plan, no one to call, your brain doesn't just cope, it builds. It literally rewires itself to handle pressure, read people faster, see through nonsense quicker, and keep going when everyone else would have quit. That's not a personality trait, that's neuroscience. And yet, nobody's talking about this. Nobody's pulling aside the person who grew up broke, or who raised themselves, or who had to carry weight nobody their age should have been carrying, and saying, hey, you know what you've been doing this whole time? You've been building one of the most sophisticated minds possible. Instead, they get pity or silence. And honestly, that's kind of infuriating to me. So that's what this is about. Not toxic positivity, not everything happens for a reason, just the actual psychological truth about what a hard life quietly builds inside you. Let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing, and this one genuinely surprised me when I came across it, is that adversity physically changes the way your brain solves problems, like structurally. Psychology shows that people who grew up in unpredictable environments develop something called cognitive flexibility, which is basically a fancy term for you're really, really good at switching gears when everything goes sideways. Here's the difference. Someone who grew up in a stable, calm, predictable home, their brain learned a comforting lesson early on. Things follow patterns. Expect consistency. And that's great until life throws something genuinely chaotic at them. Then that brain kind of short circuits because it was never trained for chaos. Now, think about someone who never quite knew what tomorrow was going to look like. Different story. Their brain was constantly scanning, constantly adjusting, holding 5 possible outcomes at once and ready to pivot at any second. That's not just anxiety, by the way. I know it can feel like just anxiety, but it's also a form of mental agility that CEOs are literally paying executive coaches to develop. Research from developmental psychology shows that kids raised in complex or unstable environments often grow into adults with stronger improvisational thinking. When a plan collapses, they don't freeze, they're already building the next one. And to everyone watching from the outside, that just looks like someone who's good under pressure. It looks like calm, it looks like leadership, and it is. They just never got credit for what built it. Here's the second thing, and this one's a bit deeper. A hard life tends to burn out your tolerance for self-deception, and I think this is massively underrated. When you're comfortable, really comfortable, it's shockingly easy to lie to yourself. Dress up a bad decision as a logical one, avoid the hard conversation because, honestly, what's the worst that happens? Comfort creates space for denial. But when the stakes are real, when getting it wrong costs you something you can actually feel, you learn very fast to see things as they actually are. Not as you want them to be, not as it would be convenient for them to be, as they are. Think about a single mom working 2 jobs, managing a budget down to the last few dollars. She doesn't get to believe it'll all magically work out. She has to see reality clearly and then move inside it intelligently with whatever she's got. Honestly, that level of clear-eyed precision, most MBA programs couldn't teach it. Research actually backs this up. People with significant lived adversity consistently score higher on realistic risk assessment tasks than people from more sheltered backgrounds. Not because they're pessimists, because reality's been their most honest teacher. Okay, the third one. This is probably my personal favorite, and I'll admit it sounds backwards at first. A hard life builds a really deep, really real kind of empathy. Not the social media kind, not the sending love and light from a comfortable distance kind. The kind that comes from actually having been on the floor. From knowing exactly what it feels like when you're embarrassed about what you can't afford, when you're scared but you have to pretend you're not, when you need help but asking for it feels like announcing your own failure. You know that feeling, in your body, not just in your head. And here's what psychology shows. Emotional attunement, that deep ability to actually understand what someone else is experiencing, it grows strongest through your own vulnerability. When you know what it's like to feel invisible, you notice almost immediately when someone else feels unseen. When you know what it's like to be the person in the room who doesn't quite belong, you become the one who instinctively makes space. That's not a small thing. That's the intelligence that holds families together. That's what makes the therapist people actually open up to. That's what turns a manager into a leader people would genuinely follow through anything. Your ability to feel the room, to catch what's unspoken, to sit with someone in their worst moment without flinching, that was built in your hardest seasons, whether you know it or not. Okay, moving on. And this one's kind of funny in a slightly painful way. You know that famous psychology experiment, the marshmallow test, where they sat kids in front of a marshmallow and told them, you can eat it now or wait 15 minutes and get two, and then tracked those kids for decades and found that the ones who waited tended to do better in almost every measurable area of life. Here's what nobody talks about, though. How do you develop the ability to wait? For a lot of people who grew up in scarcity, financial, emotional, whatever kind, waiting wasn't some discipline they practiced, it wasn't a mindfulness exercise, it was just Tuesday. You waited because you had no choice. You went without because that was the reality. And somewhere in that, quietly, without anyone acknowledging it, a kind of endurance got built, a confidence that you can survive the gap between where you are and where you want to be, because you've survived it before, without a map, without a guarantee. Research in resilience psychology shows that people with histories of real adversity demonstrate stronger persistence when rewards are delayed. In plain terms, they don't quit as easily, not because of some vague toughness, but because they have actual evidence, lived, personal, undeniable evidence that they can outlast discomfort. That's not stubbornness, that's earned confidence, and there's a massive difference. Fifth thing, and this one's about failure, because a hard life does something really specific to your relationship with failure. It makes it smaller. When you've already lost things, real things, stability, safety, relationships, sometimes your whole sense of self, a failed attempt at something just doesn't carry the same catastrophic weight anymore. You already know the answer to the question everyone else is afraid to ask. What happens if I lose? You know what happens. You survive it. You've done it before. And that knowledge, that's freeing. That's what allows someone who grew up with basically nothing to start a business in a field they're still learning, while someone with every single advantage stands frozen at the edge of that decision, paralyzed by what they might lose. Psychology shows that people who've experienced and recovered from real setbacks demonstrate lower fear of failure and higher willingness to take intentional risks. Not recklessness, intentional, considered, eyes-open risk, because they've already done the math on what losing looks like, and the math says, I'll be okay. And then the sixth thing, the deepest one. A hard life gives you a fundamentally different relationship with meaning. Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist, Holocaust survivor, spent decades writing about this. His big idea was, a person can endure almost any how if they have a strong enough why. And what he observed, and what research in post-traumatic growth keeps confirming, is that meaning isn't something comfort really generates, not on its own. Meaning gets forged. It comes out of cost, out of loss, out of having to rebuild your understanding of who you are after something took apart the version you used to be. People who've lived through genuine difficulty tend to carry this groundedness about them. They know, like really know, what matters and what doesn't. They've been stripped down to what's real often enough that they've stopped wasting energy on what isn't. Crazy, right? That's one of the rarest things a person can have, and it doesn't come from success, it comes from surviving something. So let me bring this home, because here's what I actually want you to take away from this. If your life has been hard, if it's been marked by struggle, scarcity, chaos, by seasons where you genuinely weren't sure how you were going to get through, you've been in training, not suffering for nothing, not falling behind while everyone else gets ahead, training. You've got cognitive flexibility that people are paying coaches to try to manufacture. You've got a clarity of perception that takes most people years of therapy to approach. You've got empathy that goes right down to the bone. You've got endurance, a real, tested, unshakable relationship with failure, and a sense of meaning that doesn't crack easily because it wasn't handed to you. It was built. Now, I'm not saying the hard parts were okay. I'm not asking you to be grateful for pain. That's not what this is. But I am asking you, gently, genuinely, to stop treating your history like a deficit. Stop apologizing for where you came from. Stop assuming that people who had it easier are somehow further ahead. Because honestly, in all the ways that actually matter, they're often not. You're not behind. You're differently equipped. And that difference, it's worth something. It's worth quite a lot, actually. If something in this hit home for you, if you felt seen by any part of it, subscribe, because this is what we do here every single week. Not just explaining psychology, actually seeing the person on the other side of the screen. That's you, by the way. See you in the next one.